Hi, this is Ken Hackshaw, and I want to invite all our listeners to another installment of Risk Unfiltered. I have the privilege to have as a guest this morning Mr. Stefano Capodagli. I hope I didn't muck that last name up, who is the Chief Risk Officer of the Caribbean Development Bank. Welcome, Stefano, to Risk Unfiltered.
Thank you, Ken. My
Brilliant.
pleasure to be here.
So why don't you tell the folks who you are, from whence you came, and why the heck you are in Barbados?
Sure. Yes, but with great pleasure. And thanks again, Ken, and the Caribbean Risk Management Academy for inviting me for this podcast. I joined CDB, the Caribbean Development Bank, here in Barbados 1 year and 1 month ago. So coming from a very long, extensive experience in risk management and also in banking and finance, in international landscape. I work in several multilateral institutions, including the EBRD, the African Development Bank, the IFA, the Investment Fund for Agriculture Development, and also I work for the Organization of Africa, Caribbean and Pacific States Organization in Brussels that work with the European Commission. And previously I've been a CRO of banks in Cyprus and in the Middle East. So I have also extensive experience in banking. And I'm very pleased to be here and to say that indeed the challenges of the Caribbean region for what concerns risk management are many, but at the same time there is a great potential of improvement and growth and evolution. I would like to say more evolution than just growth. And so I believe very much that the mission of Caribbean Risk Management Academy is really appropriate and actual, and I will be very happy to contribute more in this.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
So first thing, let's get the personal questions out of the way. How does it feel to be working? And I'm sure you would have been or would have vacationed or lived in maybe some other islands, but how does it feel to be living and working out of a Caribbean island like Barbados versus, say, Cyprus and those other European places you have been?
Well, definitely there is a different vibes.
Yes.
And in all respect, no, there is an amazing, how to say, the work-life balance is different here.
That's for sure.
What I really enjoy is not only the nature and the beauty of the islands. I've been in other islands, and I've been quite a few islands in the Caribbean. But I think in general, what I really enjoy is people here. And I feel my country, I'm from Italy, as you could guess from my accent.
Definitely.
But we are very close in terms of how we live our life, the social life, the openness, the hospitality, the socialization, and also the fact that both enjoy this good work-life balance, work and having the private life that is family, friends. So very much in tone with my past, let's say. Although in the recent years, having been working in other environment, I have been quite challenged because, working in some areas like in the Middle East, it's difficult. I work in Russia, Ukraine, Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and those are very different, okay, in terms of work environment, also in terms of social environment.
Right. Okay, so one last question on the personal side. Do you bring, and this probably speaks to more of the risk culture, because I would imagine that the specific, not just the cultural vibes as you call it, but the risk culture of the institutions in Barbados is very different from the other countries you'd have worked with, right? So how do you factor that into your relationships and the work the CDB is doing, or in making your decisions to fund, not fund? How much does the culture of the organization come into any play in the thinking or in the processes of the CDB?
Yeah, indeed, I have to say that CDB has been building up the risk culture definitely in the last 15 years, more than in the past. And definitely what we are now we are doing more with myself and my team is to also foster this culture of, as we were talking previously, a proactive, forward-looking approach to risk management. Because, as I said, risk management is a dynamic concept, and we need and it's a continuous evolution, and risks. There are emerging risks that we need to factor all the time. So this is the way we are more and more approaching risk management. But indeed, the bank has we have a best practice enterprise risk management framework that has been enhanced since I joined, and we have standard of credit risk project, let's say project risk assessment in different areas, because CDB is doing both grant for technical assistance and financing instruments for countries, and in small part also for private sector. Actually, the private sector is planned to be growing in the next years. So we have this standard approach, and we really are comprehensively assessing all risks.
Right. So
institution entity that we finance.
Okay. So the technical assistance that you render, does that technical assistance include any deficiencies you would probably identify in the institutions seeking funding around risk management? And how do you identify those deficiencies? Is it just by, do you have a risk framework? What does CDB do to risk assess the institutions that are coming to you, private or public?
Well, the technical assistance is for capacity building, for building capacity in the institutions, in the entities that we are our partners, our clients. So let's use this word. What approach we adopt? We have, as I said, a project approval process that include an extensive due diligence. So in the process of due diligence, and my team also joined this team of due diligence. Often, depending on the sometimes joining in person in the mission, and other times in virtual sessions, and we definitely collect all data information about the way the institution approach risk management. So, in particular, we call governance and risk management area of assessment. Let's say, where we also analyze what type of risk standards, risk architecture those institutions are. Of course, it's different between a public and a private institution, but in general, we are doing this comprehensively. One area that is very much our focus is the area of climate risk, ESG risk. This is, and you understand this, how much is actually important for the Caribbean region. I anticipate something you wanted me to
because one as you mentioned ESG, there was an article, I think KPMG put out about 2 days ago, or was it EY? And they are recommending, I think it was from one of those accounting agencies, but nonetheless, they are recommending, and tell me if CDB or you from a personal, as a risk practitioner agrees, that before, because I totally agree with this, before any entity develops or want to put forward an ESG platform, they must have a functional, formal risk management framework in place. Because I know of institutions, because those are the new buzzwords, sustainability, resilience, ESG. But I know intimately that they do not have a formal risk management framework in place. So what these guys are suggesting, that for you need a good framework to build upon. And if you're going the ESG way, you should have that. Are you in agreement with that? And how then would you, the CDB, ensure that
the approach should be holistic, first of all. Should be holistic. And the first step is to have an appropriate and functioning operationalized enterprise risk management framework. I just want to anticipate that we are going to publish with a colleague of economist department. We are publishing on the Journal of Sustainable Development an article about embedding ESG into enterprise risk management framework. And especially for looking at the sustainability, Caribbean region sustainability. So actually, it's going to be published soon.
Actually, I finished up that paper about 2.5 weeks ago. I'll share it with you. At the side. But how does CDB encourage? I mean, what's the risk and reward? So an entity comes to you, private or public, and they require financing for some capital financing to build a hospital or something.
Mhm.
Or they want to expand their manufacturing base if it's a private institution. And they do not now have, it's a two-part question. If they don't have an ESG framework in place, do you encourage them to do so? And secondly, if they want to push the ESG agenda, and some of them are doing it because it's the new thing, right? But let's say they're honest with their intent and they do not have a functional, formal risk management framework in place. What's the carrot and stick approach, if there is one, from the CDB? Do you guys say, no, we could hold back financing until you get that, or we can help you get to that place in conjunction with the financing? How does that work? Without giving away secrets, that is.
Let me first give you a bit of also background, in the sense that we have a very strong expert of ESG in the operations, in the front line, in the first line operation team. There is a team of ESG that is really top in terms of professionalism and in terms of standards. And we have a system of assessment of different risk, ESG risk. So we have a scorecard for this. So there is an assessment very clear, the categories of ESG.
Right. Yeah.
So that is definitely for sure. When is a question of looking at the standard that our entities, our clients are adopting? Of course, we advise them, and if there is a need, in cases, we eventually develop some capacity building program, as I was mentioning, specifically focus on those areas. For example, we recently did some capacity building for some institution for assessing the strategy, for defining the strategy of climate risk. And this is key, because what you see in the Caribbean is that those countries, those islands, have an issue of climate adaptation and resilience.
Yeah.
The issue is not just responding to the disaster, is to making sure that the disaster doesn't make so many damages, because you have a resilient environment.
Right.
And this is what Barbados has been doing, for example, in the last years, a clear strategy, and they are planning to do more, is, for example, increasing the standard of housing, because there are many houses still that have a wooden roof, and with hurricane, the wooden roof. It's easy. Or the system of electricity. The electricity system is still based on the
poles
in wood that immediately, if there is a hurricane, it will be swapped out. And the same for the banks, the sea banks, the sea banks that are sometimes, as we saw recently with the Beryl, are exposed to the sea storm, and that is very strong and quite damaging in case of hurricane.
So let's stay with that. Let's pull that thread a little bit. So I sit on the board of a bank in St. Vincent. I have a couple clients, a bank and a credit union I'm currently working with to develop, and the operative word there is to develop an enterprise risk management, develop and deploy enterprise risk management. Actually, we just finished it for the bank. In September, we're starting to do one for a credit union. With respect to some of these small island developing states, right? And I blame this, I ascribe responsibility for the lack of effective risk management and resilience to the leaders or the decision makers. And this is why I'm saying that. There's such a strong focus, up to and including the island that of my birth, and I have clients there, Trinidad and Tobago, on just simply disaster risk management. And you need that. But in the absence of something more proactive, like vulnerability assessment, sustainability, resilience, it's not an integrated framework that they have. They have a standalone disaster risk management, and that's it. Yeah. What role can, you just described what you have done and is doing when these entities come before you and they lack certain either technical capabilities or capacities. You train them up. But staying with climate risk for a second, what kind of caveat? Because again, it's a push and pull. If these guys don't necessarily understand the value of these things, I have a mantra that goes like this: if you can't think it, you can't act on it. That's why they bring folks like you and I to come and train them up. Yeah.
Yeah.
But what role can CDB play? And you mentioned something about risk management. It needs to be an evolution. Quite true. I would add another word to that. Sometimes we need a revolution. Because we need to constructively disrupt the thinking of many of our leaders. And that's my personal view. And I share that with executives and board members and ministers when I have the opportunity. But for the Caribbean as a whole, how do we ensure, how can CDB, and given your role as chief risk officer, how can you proactively, or what are you planning to do proactively to ensure that these guys, these institutions, these islands have an integrated risk framework that covers ERM, operational risk, disaster resilience? So it's integrated and not just siloed, because there will always be gaps when they're siloed. I mean, what's your thinking, and what role can CDB play in that space?
Well, I can tell you very clearly that the bank has a strategy very clear, and the specific pillars of the strategy. And one of this is called building institutional capacity.
Right.
And in the building institutional capacity, this means institutional capacity of the clients, okay, and so the countries that we are financing, and of the institution ourselves.
Of course.
It is two sides. It's not one side. And so in that institutional capacity strategy, there is a strategic pillar. There is a clear understanding that we need to build institutional capacity for absolutely for the area that are the weaknesses and the area that has challenges. In my view, and this is what I've been also in some way, let me use this word preaching, but in the sense really that it's the approach to, as you said, is not just disaster risk. We need to approach the issue of climate risk in a multi, I call this integrated and multi-layered.
Yes.
So the problem is the adaptation, the resilience should be addressed at macro level.
Yes.
So institutional capacity of the institution, the public, at meso level. That means at the level of, for example, professional association, community, intermediaries, okay, and at the micro level, so at level of business.
Yes.
So the business has to be resilient, has to do their own. So this way of approaching climate risk, and so to say, having enterprise risk frameworks, implementing appropriate and international best practice standards, so risk management, and embedding the ESG into this framework, and so but having a strategy, and a clear strategy, long-term strategy, not just response plan.
Yeah.
That's the way that ensure a really holistic approach, and that would ensure that these countries, these islands, become resilient and so the eventual consequences, okay, because the probability could be still high, but the impact would be minimized because of the way has been, the risk management that's been.
But you see, Stefano, and again, I speak from a lived experience perspective. Many of the islands, territories, aren't thinking like that. They aren't. And I say, as a practitioner, that the greatest risk to any institution is its people, because they're the ones who are making the decisions. Not AI, because AI gives you data and information, but a judgment call needs to be made. A decision needs to be made, right? And my fear is that the decision makers, and it's not just the Caribbean, it happens definitely on other continents as well, but more so because with respect to climate risks, the Caribbean is at a higher risk of being impacted by probably most other continents, right? With the exception of probably some on the African coast and so forth. But when it comes to hurricanes, I think the Caribbean stands on the top of the food chain for risks. So is it possible for, well, can CDB play a more big brother role in saying that, and again, this is just me thinking out loud, because if there isn't legislation around not having that, there must be some level of consequence. Because if institutions or decision makers think that, you know, I could come to, whether it's IDB, CDB, any of those major funding, to get financing for a capital project, and I will always get it. I mean, that sort of, it almost takes away the need for ensuring that your funds are protected, because you're buying some additional risk. Because if these entities and organizations taking a huge loan from you, and they get so significantly impacted by some disaster, they may be unable to repay the loan. So ensuring that they protect themselves, i.e. via this integrated risk framework. So is CDB, I think the question I'm probably going to ask is CDB prepared to say, no, we're not giving this loan until you have these things?
Okay, let me see. I give you my answer as a chief risk officer. Okay, I cannot talk for the whole bank.
Exactly.
Because this, and I can tell you that what the bank is working on is on specific instrument. Okay,
right.
Like IDB has already adopted, and World Bank as well, some instrument that could help in case of this disaster, this event, help to as alleviate the burden of the debt. Of course, with different sizing, depending also on the bank balance sheet. So we need to also look at this, of course. But it's called climate resilience debt clause. It's one of the instruments. One of these. There are many. There are several others. Like you saw recently publication. This is not CB. This is for example, UK with Barbados and with commercial banks have done this debt to climate swap.
Yes.
For example, this is another instrument. But this instrument we are studying, and we hope that we could implement in next years, is this climate resilient debt clause that basically suspend a standstill for a couple of years of the debt repayment of the country that is affected, in order to create fiscal space, and help them in the phase of reconstruction after the damages. This is a solution that has already demonstrated to be quite successful in other regions, also in other countries, and is now also recently has been included in one of the big infrastructure contract finance in Guyana, with IDB and other international institutions. So it's going to be something that is by project, and we are planning to do this by portfolio. So that's absolutely major. So I'm telling you this because it's something we are working on, but we still have not found the final solution is on this. But it's interesting, this, and it is very actual for most of the MDBs. Also in other regions, like in Asia, I am in contact with the chief risk officer of Asian Development Bank. They're also working on this. They have other issues. For example, they have flooding there. Other type of disaster, and also they need this type of.
But to your earlier point, Stefano, it's not going to get any better by way of climate risks.
No,
that's going to be exponentially higher probability with a higher impact for the most part. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to ask you your personal opinion, having now been in the Caribbean for a little while for a second. I have come to the conclusion, and many folks share this, that there are institutions, private and public, that are eager to spend to repair and fix after the disaster than to spend to build capacity to prevent or mitigate a disaster. Have you encountered that in any form?
Yes, yes, that's something that you mentioned. I recollect from my previous experience. In North Africa, for example, I was working in North Africa and in Algeria. I work in Algeria, and this is what unfortunately we have seen. In that case, they have issues with the sea, shore, and with the flooding. Okay, also there, yes, the issue is it's also in terms of, I would say, in terms of what is more, it's also a matter of business, let me say, no?
Right. Yeah.
It's an issue of business. So yeah, if you adopt a strategy of resilience, of course, you will reduce the amount of business that you would create in case of disaster to restore it was
Right.
built. No, that's of course. But on the other hand, if you build a strategy and you make more resilient your country, you probably have other opportunity of business.
Yes. Yeah.
So you increase the opportunity of
So
business
you have to
because,
strike.
for
You have to strike
example,
that balance.
investor will come more, I'd say, like more favorable, will be more favorable to invest in the country because they know that the country is resilient to the disaster. So I see this as not really. Sometimes it's a bit narrow-minded, the approach that some
Because
institutions and some
sometimes
operators.
I get engaged after the risk have been eventuated. So something goes wrong. You would have known about it before. There are instances I would love to go public and say, "I told you so." I tend to be an ethical person. My ex-wife doesn't think like that. You may want to take that out when we edit it. But I am a very, when it comes to risk management, and the value proposition it brings, and once it's not cost prohibitive, because you don't want to take a hammer to swat a fly. So, but then there needs to be, and I'm very, I don't want to say passionate, but my fear is, Stefano, with many of the leaders in institutions, public or private, they have that thinking still, many of them. If it's not broken, we're not fixing. Why should I spend X number of dollars to put in this framework when I can take that and try and expand the business? So how do we, from one risk practitioner to a next, not as necessarily the chief risk officer of CDB, how do we get these guys on that new thinking around risk management? Because many of them, unfortunately, would never have been exposed or trained in this space. And that's okay, right? But they need to surround themselves, as you, I'm sure, with some of your colleagues there. You need to ensure that you have people around you that brings that expertise or that subject matter knowledge to say to you, no, we need to spend X number of dollars to be a bit more resilient. And by the way, as my colleague from Australia, Dr. Black oftentimes says, resilience is not just about bouncing back, it's about bouncing forward. Because if the back was not well prepared to deal with the disaster that came on board, you don't want to go back to that, right? So as a risk practitioner, how other than taking these leaders and beating them on the head with a risk framework, how do we get them on the same page as we are to be more proactive in even the strategic planning, right? So you're doing your objectives, and part of that should be, okay, what's the spend on modernizing our risk management framework? I have not seen, other than the one I'm working on now, a strategic plan that says, okay, and well, in the Caribbean, I should say, that says, okay, this is enhance our risk management framework and associate a spend with that. It's about growth, adding new businesses. So how do we get them to start thinking like that? You have
the way of thinking, if you deal with business people, no, the way of thinking, and this is what I've been doing very, very often, and this is what it's my generally the way I approach when we discuss about strategy and risk. Right. The way of doing is you need to factor the cost of risk.
Yes.
Are you factoring in your business plan, in your strategy plan, the cost of risk? That's
but some of them aren't, right? But some of them aren't.
No, they aren't. Many of them are not. Cost of risk, cost of risks, because are different risks. Are you doing a real cost benefit analysis?
Yeah.
Because how much cost you are telling me? Implement a framework. There is a cost, but what are the benefit then? And so the reward that you can get if you have an appropriate framework. So I think we have to we use the same metrics. Okay, that they use, but and expressing better and making them factor the cost of those risks that are, could really jeopardize the result of the strategy. So you set some target, but what we have been doing, and I did this in my several experience in the past, is a target at risk. your strategic target are at risk. Factor the risk, and so this target, you need to factor that those targets could be reduced, could be haircutted because of the risk that you have not factored and you have not mitigated and prevented. So prevent. And this is the way that we also why we look at risk appetite, because you need to factor this in your strategic plan. You say, how much risk you want to take. So be aware and set your threshold, because if you go beyond the threshold, your capital will
how do we get them to do that? Because for the organizations I've gone in, so before I implement a ERM framework, I ask for a bunch of data points, audit reports, your strategic plan, external, internal audit. When I look at strategic plans, none of those things we are talking about are there.
And I'm talking about a dashboard. We need to have a dashboard. So a strategic plan plot into a dashboard, and the strategic plan should be then enhanced with all these KRIs. We need KRIs for this. We need key risk indicators, and this should be part of the performance management.
Okay, so we know that. How do we inculcate those things we're talking about into the agencies that do not now have it? Yes, we do these workshops, we invite them, but until they value the importance or the necessity of what we're talking about, if they're still thinking just growth in the absence of the cost of risk, then.
But Ken, there are plenty of lesson learned that we can definitely show. There are plenty of business case that you can present. I am an extensive experience of 30 years in different also emerging markets. So probably the way is to show them the real life, and you see
what can go wrong.
What can go wrong, exactly. The learned are something also in the Caribbean I didn't see much talking about lesson learned. We are working on it also here.
And the same is here. So when I lecture, one of the first things we do is two things I do, and I spend a lot of time on it, is some case study analysis and some scenario analysis, basically asking what if. And it continues to amaze me, even today, in many of the institutions that I'm involved with, that those things don't exist. Or the people who are aware of implementing those things aren't in a position of authority. They aren't decision makers. And so when they go to their managers and say, and if the manager has some level of, talking about people and culture, has some level of insecurity, they're not going to take what a subordinate is suggesting to them and start running with it. That we'll talk about that in another podcast. I want to switch quickly to one of the other questions around credit ratings of the institutions. Do you guys, and I don't mean for this to be a proprietary sort of CDB process. So if it is, then don't answer it. But is the credit rating of an institution factored in to your decision, CDB's decision making? And if there is no credit rating, how do you work that through?
Thank you. This question is very important, and I have to tell you that I'm talking in general. What is the approach that CDB, as all other MDBs, the best practice for all other NDBs. So all NDBs and CDB is part of and is following this best practice. Also, all multilateral adopt internal credit rating models. So as we are doing, so we assign rating to all entities that we finance, be them countries, so sovereign, be them FIs, financial institution, be them the corporate, project finance. So we assign an internal credit rating, and this is based on international, standard modeling standards, and these are also back tested periodically and upgraded in case of need periodically as well. So we have a full process. We are also looking at implementing model risk assessment management, because adopt model, but then you have the risk of the models. That for us, it's part of our operational risk, so has to be also addressed. And we also peer benchmark with external ratings when these entities are externally rated by the rating agencies. For example, countries in Caribbean, most of the countries, most of the islands are rated by external rating agencies. Some of them are not. So the only way we can get a rating is our internal rating. And also we sometimes look at carry crease, definitely as a second additional risk profile information. So in general, this is the way we approach the risk profile of entities, and so we definitely have advanced models for this, and we continue as I continues improve this.
Okay, so you do your internal modeling and risk rating. If Caricas has one, do you, as Standard & Poor's and Moody's now have been doing for the last 2 years, one of the rating pillars to look at is the robustness of their risk management framework.
Yeah, there are several. The rating models are based, well, for sure, they are based on quantitative and qualitative.
Right.
Okay.
Is that part of what CDB does? Do you?
Yeah. We adopt as the standard of the rating agency are adopting. So we use quantitative and qualitative factors, and these qualitative and quantitative factors are then averaged into an algorithm, and the algorithm is based on different logic probit, different models, and then on that basis we associate a probability of default, and on this probability of default, then we basically attach a rating.
Okay. Do you provide feedback to the agencies, public or private, where the rating came substandard but could have been better if they did have a formal risk management framework? I'm sure you run into agencies that don't have any, or it may not be as robust as it should be. And then developing, once you run your algorithms and you establish and assign a rating, do you provide feedback to these agencies to say, okay, if you now formalize and implement a risk management framework that puts you into a different rating category, do you give them that type of feedback?
So generally, because they are rated, they know already where the areas, because the rating agency tell them that the areas where they could improve are, for example, the governance. That's important. The management, the risk management framework, the risk management approach, the areas of internal audit, for example, also an area that policies. The different. So they generally this is done. So
one of my and this doesn't need. I'm not going to pull you into my issues with Caricas, but one of, and I've had conversations with them many years in the past that. It should not be rating an entity just based on their numbers, meaning just their financials.
No.
The days for that are long gone, right? And
also what numbers can, because if the numbers are historical, the predictive power of the rating is really limited. If you look at projections, the projected numbers, also how these projected numbers are built. And there are several other factors that are not really possible to reflect into numbers that you have to consider. So the qualitative part also has a real good value to play for the rating.
Okay, so I will end, and we can go on like this for hours. But
yes, indeed.
I want to ask you to suggest from a risk management perspective, and as the CRO of the Caribbean Development Bank, if you are to suggest 3 risk management improvements, so 3 improvements in the risk management category that institutions should focus on, what will be those 3 categories of risk management, whether private and public, from your vast experience?
When you say categories, what do you mean exactly?
Oh, I say categories. Is it in education of the people in the risk management space?
Okay,
Is it processes?
In the pillars.
In the pillars. Yes.
Yeah,
what would be the 3 in order of priority? 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, one is the risk governance.
Okay.
Define
risk governance from a CDB for those who may not know. When you say risk governance, what do you mean?
Well, the adoption of a structure of that allow risk-informed decisions.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Brilliant. So that's number one. Right.
Number one. Then second is for me it's risk culture. Brilliant. Actually, risk culture should be the first, but because it's cross-cutting.
I think that's part of governance.
So let's say I put in order because you asked me to put in order. So risk culture, it's everything from the top
to the down,
to down and the vice versa. So bottom
lateral
up.
And vertical,
Yes. So that's absolutely. And the third for me, it's the people. If I say process, it's
people. I agree.
People, because without people, you don't have any process. So people need to be. You need to really make sure that there is and so culture and people are together. No.
Yeah.
So that's important. So people and understanding the importance of enhancing the risk skills of people.
Yeah, actually,
at all level, it's not, and we were discussing
levels, across the board. No, I agree.
Across
one
the
of
board.
the problems, and I'm sure you experience that because you also lecture. So one of my pushback to participants who come to my lectures is, and some of them are pretty senior. You may have a general manager or a chief risk officer, and then the majority of them are department heads and others. So oftentimes I will ask the question, so why aren't the decision makers coming to this though? Because when you go back, can you influence change? I always ask, can you influence change? And in the majority of the instances that I would get, the feedback I will get, sometimes I can, sometimes I can't, right? And so the part of the people and the training aspect is, in my mind, is upskilling, but there needs to be an element of unlearning. Because that which we did for risk management 3-4 years ago cannot be used to help fix the problems of identification and management of risk today. So there needs to be that part of it. And then the innovation you spoke about.
Yes. Now artificial intelligence can play an important
role in that. Yes.
Well.
Yeah.
This would be another session of long, of interview. I would love to have a conversation about artificial intelligence.
The next time we taping this, since it's Risk Unfiltered, it will be in person with some cocktails and beverages, and we can go much longer.
Wonderful.
Closer to the beach. So Stefano, any parting words for as the Chief Risk Officer of the CDB for our listeners?
Yeah, I just want to say that in every strategy there is always an aspect of risk that you need to consider. So whatever strategy you are planning to design and implement, never forget that risk is your enabler.
And I couldn't have said that better, even with that good Italian accent. I couldn't have said it better.
Thank you.
Stefano, the Chief Risk Officer of the Caribbean Development Bank, I want to thank you.
Thank you very much, Ken. Thank you very much.
And to the listeners, you'll be happy to know that Stefano will be one of the keynote speakers at our Caribbean Risk Management Conference being held in Jamaica, October 24th. So you will hear and see and feel his passion for risk. I'll probably get an autograph or two from him if he's so
Thank you. Not less than your passion, Ken.
Stefano, thank you much, my friend. We talk again soon.